Hello and welcome to B&D Now, a podcast about independent game development. I'm your host, Tobiah Marks, and with me today is Ryan Wienkel. Hi, Ryan.
Hey, thanks.
So, Ryan, why do you make games?
Well, besides the fact that they're just the most amazing and fun thing that I can think of to work on personally, I really am inspired by being on the forefront of what I feel as the entertainment and media movement in the sense that we're exploring a new way to tell stories. Well, new meaning 30 years old or 40 years old, but
Yeah, new in relative scheme of things.
right, of course, but we're able to push the boundaries of how someone can experience a story or experience a world or just an idea in a way that is fundamentally different than any way that's ever been done in human history, in the sense of we're no longer passive participants in this story. And I think that opens up worlds of possibility for experience.
Yeah, it's definitely cool that you come from the story aspect. I think it's really different when you are someone who experiences it. The example I like to use is the Half-Life series of games. They're my favorite games of all time. And when I tell the story to a friend, it's, oh man, it's so cool. You're a scientist and aliens invade, and the big twist is that like the government's in on it. It's like, okay, that actually just sounds like a pretty awful movie, but
That's been done a few thousand times before.
right? But when you play that game, it's such a different experience because
Right.
you are Gordon Freeman in a way that no other game has been able to capture. Well, I mean, some have gotten close, but I think it really gets that first person aspect where you really feel like you are part of this story and affecting this story and part of this bigger world in a way that you wouldn't if you were just passively watching Gordon's adventures.
Sure. And I mean, outside of simply the story, um, also just the general way that players can experience something, I think is being taken to a whole new level. And I don't quite think that's being fully explored yet. And like I said, that's what inspires me a lot about working in this medium, is because I think that the potential for where we can go is so much greater than and unknown than the other ones. Daniel Cook over at lostgarden.com, he writes a lot about some pretty heavy things, or at least he used to. And he talks about, the possibility of video games or a video game like experience being equal to almost like religious possibilities or spiritual possibilities, in the sense of you can engage a person down to their core in the experience in ways that we haven't tried yet. So I think, combined with story experience, but just experience, period, I think the potential that we have in this industry and in this medium far outstrips anything in human history. And that really gets me up early in the morning.
Very, very cool. So, how did you get into the industry? Where did you start?
Well, probably the same spot as a lot of naive, wide-eyed, hopeful people, and that was I've been playing games for most of my life, and I think I was 18 or 19, and of course had the absolute certainty that I could just do it so much better. And why were all these games being made in this way when it should be made in this way? And so I got in on the forums. I can't remember which forums it was. Maybe the Torque Unity or the Torque Engine forums or some other conceptart.org. And I started gathering people together who had kind of the same vision. And we went out there to make the next great game, and then spun our wheels for a couple of years until the harsh reality of that this is extremely challenging, complex, and a lot more involved than any of us had ever imagined kicked in, and then scaling back our ambitions to match reality a little bit. So yeah, it was just wanting to make an awesome game and having no idea how hard it was, and so just running forward with that blind ambition until you kind of hit your first wall.
So was that like Ironbelly Studios when you first started forming that, or did you get more official later?
Oh yeah. So in the beginning, we were running under a company named NetFlow Developments, and I was running a programming and web design outsourcing company with one of my good friends in India at the turn of the millennium, and we kind of had a decent business going, and we said, why don't we just hire some extra staff as programmers and do that, and I can find passionate artists and communities, and we can bring those people together. And so we ran under that company name for a while, and Ironbelly didn't start until 2009, and that's after we got really heavily involved in the UDK forums, and that's mainly where we lived for a couple of years, and got together one day and said we need a better kind of gamey name for our company. And so Ironbelly was the top of the list in terms of names that got submitted in this meeting. We don't really know what it means. It just kind of evokes this feeling that we liked.
Mm-hmm.
And we ran as a small sole proprietorship for a little bit. Again, trying to build what we thought was a fairly unambitious project, but even the simplest of first-person shooters involved so much more complexity than anyone thinks in the beginning. And then after, again, spinning our wheels on that project, we then kind of turned our attention to the community and saw a great need for services that we were accumulating incredible experience. I was developing good connections with a lot of very skilled people in the industry, and so we kind of put our own ambitions on the back burner, or at least I put our ambitions on the back burner. I'm sure a lot of our guys would have liked us to stick with that project, but unfortunately, we had to eat, and we started reaching out to other indie devs who needed, a robot made, or some particle effects made for a weapon, or some concepts made for some environments, and we started offering our services for hire, and that's what we've been running with ever since, and it's treated us very well. It's been very challenging, but it's been a very rewarding experience helping other people realize their visions.
What year did you first start offering your services?
2010, I would say. 2010, 2011. I would have to go back to the UDK forums, but that, I think 2011 was our first client, a gentleman by the name of Jason, and he used to run I think it's still called Panzer Studios. His game has been greenlit some 2 or 3 years later, which kind of shows you guys listening what it takes to really get a game out the door is 3, 4, 5 years of just banging your head against a wall. And eventually you break through the wall, which is great, but it takes a lot of pain and struggle. And the game was originally called Left to Rot, and I'd have to go and look at what it's called now. I mean, you can just Google left 2, the number 2 Rot, and you'll bring up a bunch of stuff with Panzer Studios. So he needed some weapons made, I think, and we modeled them, and then our second client came along, and our third, and our fourth, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, that was a really good time to get into that industry because around that like 2009, 2010 mark, there was a whole surgence of new indie companies. And by that, late 2010, early 2011 companies, those early indies were starting to be more established, starting to make some money, and starting to scale up in a way where they need extra work, need extra skilled labor that they can say, hey, where can we throw some money to and get high quality assets back?
Right. And I mean, I think to be clear, in the beginning, we certainly weren't going after people looking for super high quality assets. We were going after people that were looking for really affordable assets. I think you really have to earn your stripes before you can start breaking into even the AA scene. So we were really appealing to the single A indie studios at that point that, they wanted to spend $300 on a character, which, we might charge $1,500 or $3,000 today because the quality is so much higher than what we were doing. And mainly we know how long it takes now, so we have to charge accordingly. And so that's who we were really appealing to back then. But what I think made it to be another thing that made it to be a really good time for us was that the hype around UDK was still really, really intense. There were still a lot of wide-eyed, optimistic people that saw this engine and said, I can do anything with this. And I'm going to save up my money and I'm going to spend that $1,000 on some characters and some weapons. And I think over the course of the next 2 or 3 years, the reality, much like I experienced in the beginning with Torque and other engines, started to sink in really heavily. And you could see the message boards slowly getting a little bit less active as people realized that, oh, I can't cobble together $2,000 or $3,000 with this amazing engine and produce Dungeon Defenders or something like that. And we kind of were riding that wave of optimism until the reality kicked in. And now with Unreal Engine 4, that optimism is back as they've addressed a lot of the issues in terms of how do we allow the common person to deliver a really good gaming experience without needing too much technical knowledge.
What about Unity? Has that helped business a lot as well with its 3D engine?
Absolutely. Unity, I'll live and die by Unity, at least at this point in our career. In mid 2012, I think we pretty much were saturating, not saturating, but we were kind of tapping out the UDK market. Like I said, it was getting a little slower, but we were doing a really good job at promoting ourselves. And I realized that we had kind of plateaued in terms of the amount of business that we were pulling in. So I looked over my shoulder at the Unity community and saw that there wasn't really somebody like us down there offering the services that we were offering, or at least they weren't promoting themselves as heavily as we were. I'm sure there were dozens of people offering services better than ours, but I didn't see any active on the forums. And so I went over there and we started again pulling clients that wanted something a little bit engine agnostic, in the sense that we didn't really need to know a lot about Unity to offer the services such as 3D, 2D, stuff like that. And as we did more and more for the Unity customers, we started learning more and more about the engine, offering more engine-specific services like mechanism animations, Shuriken particle systems, and then finally topping it off with full-level design and environmental services to the point that we're at today now, which is probably 70% of our business is Unity-based. 30% is Unreal, UDK. The Unreal is definitely climbing back up now with Unreal Engine 4, but Unity Unity is definitely our mainstay right now, and it's just because I think their community is a lot more vibrant, and just the nature of their engine being so embracing to kind of people making assets for it, modularly hacking bits and pieces of it. I mean, hacking is the wrong word, but you can just take the whole art rendering pipeline and just kind of reroute it in a little bit of a different way to do something like what the guys over at Rust Ltd have done with Alloy, which is the PBR, the physically based rendering pipeline that we use with Unity, and we have since it was in its beta, and it allows us to do some incredible things. So yeah, right now Unity is where most of our attention is in terms of big projects, and then Unreal, we're ramping up with Unreal Engine 4 here and taking on some really interesting things there as well.
Do you have any of your assets on the asset store for Unity? Like, say you work with a client and then they're done, they say, well, you can then resell this to make additional money, or are you just more work for hire, one-on-one custom stuff?
Yeah, we're branching out into reselling assets, and I'm putting together a team right now to just work on asset store, and there's a lot of other asset stores besides the Unity asset store, like Turbo Squid and
Yeah,
the guys.
they've been around for years, but Unity has kind of had this big upset because so many people are going into game development through that engine and then having a one-click button. Hey, click this button right here to get a really cheap asset. It's
Yeah.
really working well, and a lot of people buy from the asset store, even if they're not even working in Unity, just because there's a lot of good quality, assets on there.
Well, as far as game developers, especially, it's our worst nemesis for impulse purchasing. I've never been an impulse purchaser online ever until the asset store, and I haven't used 70% of the assets I own. But if there's a 50% off sale, I'm the first one just to go click, 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 and buy them all. Because one day, and I think what that's doing is it's a double-edged sword in a way, in the sense that I think we're seeing what I saw in 2010, 2011 with UDK, where it's giving people maybe a little bit of a false sense of what they can do in terms of game development, because they're thinking 90% of my game sitting in the asset store. I can just buy it, 2 weeks, I've got Half-Life 3 sitting in my desk. And the reality, of course, is that when it comes to the artwork and a lot of the creative assets, it's true. You can plop it in, it's going to look great. But actually bringing it all together still requires that same technical know-how and dedication, and just, again, banging your head against a wall for a long period of time. So I think on one hand, it might be raising the expectation level of what people think they can do, which is going to lead to a little bit of disappointment. But on the other hand, it's creating what I like to call the IKEA approach to game development. And that's, when clients come to us now, and we're changing our whole business model. So when clients come to us now and they say, okay, we want you to build us a hospital, and it's got to have all this stuff in it, and we have this budget, and go and just build the hospital. The first thing I say to them is, do we really need to be building you garbage cans from scratch or chairs from scratch? And it's kind of like IKEA in the sense that nobody goes to buy a handcrafted kitchen table anymore, because what do we really care if this is a one-of-a-kind chair that you're going to eat dinner on, when I can go to the local furniture store and buy a chair that's been made 100,000 times, but it's going to cost me $20 instead of $800 or $1,600. And we're seeing the same approach in game design where we look at these assets, unless you're working on a very stylized game, we see these assets that are just commonplace generic assets, and we have to ask ourselves, why do we need to handcraft this stuff over and over again when we can take those development cycles and make our game more unique, or make our or allow our budget to be spent more on mechanics and other things. So I think on one side, it is raising expectations a little bit naively high for new people. And on the other side, it's really enabling people that might not have the budget, but do have the know-how or do have the wherewithal to create things that never before were possible.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. It's like almost an Easter egg if you notice the
Oh,
commonality of
yeah.
assets. Like when you watch movies, you can watch these supercuts of this one set at Universal Studios, and you watch, 10 different movies, and you watch them back to back, and you realize, wait, they're all in the same place. But, one time it's France, another time it's Spain, another time it's New York, and it's like kind of cool to notice the commonality between those sets if you're really into movies and
Right.
really into the Easter eggs. And so then we were going through a lot of games. I now notice, oh, this game's made in Unity. I can tell because I've seen that asset on the store. I've seen that asset. They downloaded this from here. And
Right.
I don't think negative about that game. I just think, oh yeah, that's cool. I know how that was made. Like it's as good of experience as it would be. It's not, if anything, it's more helpful if like I feel more connected to that developer in some way.
Well, you know a little bit of behind the scenes stuff, so yeah, you kind of feel like, I know this. Yeah, I know the secrets that went into this. But the important thing to keep in mind, of course, is that players have no idea. It's only the developers that are going to look at this and go, I bought that asset when it was 75% off. But the players they'll have no clue that any of this is happening. And I think that's a really important thing for developers to keep in mind, because we have some clients that are pretty diehard in the sense that they need everything made from scratch. They want to have a very unique game, even if the assets are generic and even if their art style is completely vanilla and totally realistic, in the sense that we're not making Braid or Bastion or something like that. We're just making a photorealistic game. And we'll still have these people come to us and say, yeah, you could buy it off the asset store, but then it won't be ours. We need it to be hours. And I have to sit them down and say, no player in a million years will ever notice the difference between this garbage can being one that's been used in 100 other games or one that's been made from scratch. And why does it matter at that point? And a lot of people are coming around to this, that, oh, we could have a way cooler BFG if we just didn't spend all that money on stop signs and trash cans.
Is it a misunderstanding about how the laws work in licensing? Like, oh, well, if I'm using, say I get a generic trash can and then I want to make some other game with it, I want to use some other asset, I don't fully own this asset. And so we need to pay someone to create it so that I fully own it instead of
Mm.
dealing with this licensing open IP deal. And yeah, I think even that it's really hard to say because I can't say, oh, Asset Store works this way. I don't even know 100% what the licensing deal is. Like, do I get future rights for all future games? I believe so because you
Mm.
paid money for it, but it ends up being a different issue of the IP ownership law, and they might just not want to deal with that hassle. They might just want to say, I own this 100%. I agree with you. That's probably a mistake. It's better to go the cheaper route. Especially if you have a realistic art style. It's like, why bother creating it? Half your assets are already out there. But
Right. Well, I think obviously you want to read the agreements to make sure you've read the fine print. But even at the end of the day, if for one reason, I don't think this is the case, but let's just say that you have to buy that garbage can once per game. You can only use it in one IP. I mean, you're literally going to be spending $5 on a garbage can, as opposed to, I mean, even a AAA title, we're talking about a garbage can. Let's say it's got, I don't know, 700, 2,000 tries, maybe even 3,000 tries if you want a super duper, not including the bag, of course, if you want realistic cloth simulation on the bag. But on a 3,000 try
I have
bag,
never seen a game with realistic claw simulation on a garbage bag.
well,
Oh
there,
man, we are not at that point yet.
well, I've never seen a game about a goat simulator, so who knows? The garbage bag simulator might be right around the corner where that's your main weapon, is just a garbage bag full of dirty
True
laundry.
point.
And
True
I'm coming up with
point.
IPs all over the place right now. So let's just say you're looking at a 3,000 try garbage can. You've done your high poly sculpt because you want it to be the best garbage can on the planet, and you've got you're going to go all PBR on it, so you don't have to worry about your spec maps or anything like that anymore. But you've got it all set up. You're going to be looking at, I don't know, what's that going to be? Let's say 4 hours minimum to create something like that, maybe 6, 7 hours, 8, 10 hours. So you're going to be looking at spending at least 100, 2, 3, 4, $500 on this thing, or you can spend the $5 on each title that you want to make. And in a million years, you're never going to be making enough titles that this is going to pay off making it from scratch at that level of detail. I mean, the one thing about the asset store that you have to keep in mind as well is that, like you said, it is an Easter egg hunt in a way that you're going to have to sift through a lot of low quality stuff that has been made to look really good in preview images, and then you bring it into your own engine and go, oh, that person had no idea how to weld vertices together, or these normal maps are just horrible, and you end up making it yourself. But even then, what we do with a lot of these things is we'll go out and we'll buy something off the Turbo Squid, like a super high poly garbage can. We'll get we'll get the agreements. We'll buy it. What we do is we buy it in our client's name, and we get the agreements with the vendor, and then we just take that and we use that as our starting point, and then we just create the low polys from there. And even that saves us tremendous amounts of time. There's just what we found with what our clients are asking for in terms of pricing and with the amount of competition from much lower wage parts of the world is that we have to get a little creative to produce those high quality assets in a fraction of the time. So at the end of the day, just rethinking how you're making your games. And I guess that's why, I mean, I chose the motto for our company as rethinking the way games are made, just out of a whim. But the more that we do what we do, the more it's kind of like we're becoming that motto just to stay competitive.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. So let's talk more about Ironbelly too. How many people are now part of the company?
Oh, I'm gonna have to pull up our roster for that. Well, we've got myself. We've got three producers as of today. We hired our third producer today. Our art director, and then we've got, it varies depending from month to month on the demand we have coming in. But typically, we'll have a team of 2 to 3 environmental 2D artists, two or so character artists in terms of 2D. And in terms of the 3D side of things, it can be anywhere between 5 to 6 to 7 guys. And then we've got a couple guys that are specifically geared towards Unreal in terms of the materials and environmental design and terrain and all of that fun stuff and lighting. And then 2 to 3 guys in Unity, a full-time animator, a couple of VFX guys. And then we've got two audio engineers, a QA guy, and a game designer. So I think it can vary somewhere between 15, 20, up to 30 people in a busy month.
Very cool. So is that they're all freelancers that are going on a per project basis, or you kind of have them on retainer? How does that work?
Right. Well, with the management people, it works more, not necessarily on a retainer. It's more of just every 2 weeks we just tabulate up how much time was worked and cut some checks based on that. So that's more of a, regardless of what they're doing, if they're just putting in the time, then the then they get paid. And then with the rest of the people, it's kind of morphing more into that with everybody sort of deal. Because what I want to do is I want to be able to provide a stable, predictable work environment for these people so that they don't ever have to worry about money coming in. They don't ever have to worry about looking for work. They can just focus on being creative and being awesome, which they excel at tremendously. And so we're shifting more into that where, we have our budgets, of course, and we have our schedules that we try our very best to keep. But at the end of the day, if we've budgeted 12 hours for a character and I've, pushed one of our artists to do a really good job and it took 15, then, we'll make sure they get paid for 15 hours. And then it just gets tabulated at the end of the 2 or the 3 week period, and we go from there. And then with newer people, it can work on a job by job basis. In the beginning, it was all per job. I was petrified that 1 month we would just go over on 10 jobs and I'd be out on the street. So we kind of had an agreement up front, but once you get a pretty good pipeline in place and you kind of have a nice workflow, you start getting a little bit more comfortable with that kind of ongoing risk because, we haven't sunk ourselves yet, so we must be doing something right.
So how long do you think it took to get that pipeline going where you were starting to get a steady stream of clients? Was it like that first year ramp up? You're talking multiple years?
Well, we did an internal 2012, 2013 review a couple months ago, and I've got a spreadsheet open in front of me, and I can tell you that the first quarter of the first year that we were working, let me see, how many clients did we have? Oh, we had 4 clients over 3 or 4 months, and then the next 3 months we kind of doubled that, and then it kind of hung around the 8 to 12 mark for every 3 month period. And then, so yeah, the first year we ended the year with 15 clients in the last quarter. And then it just started ramping up from there and averages between 30 to 40 clients every quarter. And it kind of happens in kind of like surges where you can feel yourself plateauing and you can feel yourself being stretched to your max with the system that you have in place, with the tools that you use. And once that gets to kind of a breaking point where you have to, put down your management duties and look at your tools and say, okay, what can we replace to make ourselves leaner, more efficient, and better? You go through this really uncomfortable period of just swapping out your project management system and bringing in a new one, where you have like a month of just chaos and overdue tasks and lack of clients because you're not prospecting. And then the next quarter, you've just doubled the amount of work that you pulled in because all of a sudden someone's like opened up a whole nother door of possibilities. And that's happened a few times over the last 2 or 3 years. So what our stream of work looks like is a steady, 5 to 10 clients every month or so, and then, or every quarter. And then all of a sudden it'll jump to like 15 to 20, and then that'll plateau for another 6 months, and then it'll jump. And currently, I don't know how many we have going on right now, but currently we're probably going through now in a week what we did in a quarter 2 years ago or so.
How many of these clients are you doing simultaneously? Like what kind of peak do you get? Are you working with 10 at once and they're all at the same time? Or are you doing one, then the other, then the other?
Right, yeah. So, I mean, the nature of running a virtual service like we are is that there's always going to be that time delay between us finishing the work, the client looking at the work, talking to their people about the work, coming back to us, their feedback might come in at 3 o'clock in the morning. So then we wake up, we talk to our people. So there's always that nice balance between having concurrent projects going on so that while you are waiting for client A to get back to you, you switch over to client B and client C. And so the whole kind of the linear one after another doesn't really work all that well on the grand scheme of things unless you're in the same room as a client. So we work with multiple clients at the same time. And my whole goal, my whole mission is in life, in my position, is just figuring out how we can take on more and have nothing fall through the cracks. And so right now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games in pre-production and planning. We've got 1, 2, 3 projects in kind of wrapping up in verification. And then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. We got about 18 or 19 on the go. And when I say projects, I don't mean we have 18 full games on the go. I mean, we might be making one zombie for project A. We might be making, 100 characters for project B. And then we might be making an entire game for project C. So what we try to do is we try to balance it so that it's like a pyramid. The smaller the tasks, we try to have a good number of them at the bottom of that pyramid so that we're churning through them quick, we're pumping them out. And then as we move up in complexity of the task, we start to rein it in so we make sure we never have more of those than the smaller ones. And then, the peak of that pyramid is entire projects. And we try to really limit those to, 3 to 4 games ongoing at any given time. At this current point, I mean, obviously, ideally, I would like to have somewhere between 10 or 20 games in development. But at this point, wanting to make sure that pyramid stays in place, so that as in my position have to manage the budgets and kind of keep the money flowing to these larger projects ahead of when the clients pay us. We have all of these smaller projects just churning through and having our deposits and having our final outstanding invoices being paid. So it kind of keeps the whole machine running really nicely.
What's the medium turnaround time for these clients? Like, are you averaging a couple weeks? I mean, obviously it depends on the workload, versus a couple assets versus a full game. But
Yeah.
are they sticking around for like a month? Are you doing the full pre-production, production, and it's taking a while?
Sure. Well, I mean, like I said, it depends on what tier of the pyramid you're on. We've got, I think there's 5 tiers that we usually organize things by, just by how long or the size of the workload. So
tell me about the tiers. I'm interested.
Yeah, it's just basically tier 5 would be something we can crank out in a week. Tier 4, 2 weeks. Tier 3, a month. Tier 2 would be a 2 to 3 month project, and then a tier one project would be 8 to 12 months or more. So yeah, like I said, we try to have a good number of tier four and tier five projects. One of the really exciting things that I love about Ironbelly and working the way we do, because I get a lot of people when they start working, especially people in management, that they still have these grand ideas. I think I have grand ideas as well, but they're just shifted slightly. And they say one of the first things they always ask when I'm interviewing is, how many internal projects do you have going on that you are developing the IP yourself? And I'll just say, well, none, or maybe one. And then they always say, like, well, don't you want to just make your own game? And what I find is that, at least at this point in my career, uh, it's not so much about the idea anymore. It's about the execution, and it's really just about just the execution and the presentation, because everyone has a million great ideas, and I've lost that sense that somehow my ideas are better than your ideas. And I think that if you came to us with just this brilliant idea, and even if it was a mediocre idea, and I'm like, well, we've done like 6 of those in the past month and a half, I still think we can take that and find something really special in there, you know? And I get as much or more excitement, because not only do I get excited about your project, but I get to see your face as you're witnessing this dream of yours come to life finally, after getting jerked around by every wannabe developer on the planet. And I find that to be really exciting. So what I really like to do is I like to have a lot of those tier four, tier five, tier three projects, because we get to churn through them really quick, and we get to bring in brand new ideas and brand new concepts to work on, character concepts or character models. So the bottom of that pyramid is a much broader base, and that's because it gives us that stability to be working on larger projects that have slower turnaround times in terms of payment. But it also gives us all of this great inspiration and great creativity coming through, and just great people coming through with awesome ideas. And so, yeah, in terms of how it's structured right now, I would say, yeah, probably 60% of the stuff is tier 4, 5, and then we're looking at probably 20% is tier 3, 15% tier 2, and 5% tier 1 or so.
Very cool. So I'm sure there's a lot of listeners out here in the podcast who are interested in, getting art in their game. What are the different costs for the different tier? I mean, it probably varies project to project, no, but what kind of range are we talking about here?
Sure. Well, I mean, again, I wouldn't be able to lump costs in by the tier, because some long projects just take a long time, but they're not that work intensive. So I mean, it's probably better just to look at it per asset or per job, and it's going to vary a lot. What I always like to approach clients with is the mindset that, as long as your budget is within reason, we'll make sure to tailor our workload to what you can afford. So if you want to come to us and you say, listen, I want the Last of Us quality AAA characters with facial expressions, and they have to move, and I want to feel them, that the uncanny valley has just been blown away, and I want to spend $300 to get it done. Of course, in that case, I'll tell you, I'm really sorry, but we can't work together. But here's the Unity forums, here's the UDK forums. You're best to probably start a collaborative project. And that's really the only time that I'll try to turn someone away. But if they have something more realistic in mind, a character like what I just described, we're looking at 50 hours, 60 hours, 100 hours, 150 hours of work to pull it off. And as long as their budgets are somewhere reasonable for that amount of work, then if they come to us with $1,500 or a $2,000 budget, then I'll say, well, here's what it takes to make what you want. Now, clearly, we don't have the budget to do that, but what we can do is something pretty close, and I'll show them some examples, and I'll say, as long as you're not hell-bent on matching, the quality of these AAA games, but getting pretty close, then we can certainly work together. And usually what happens is saner heads prevail at the end of that conversation, and we go to the table with just lesser expectations, but something more realistic and feasible. So character work for a AAA title, what I would call AAA, but in essence it's AA, we're going to be looking at anywhere between $1,000, $1,200, $1,500 upwards to $3,000, $3,500 if you want to put plate mail on top of them and have it rigged and moving and stuff like that. Weapons for rifles or pistols, again, depending on the level of detail, can range from a few $100, up to $1,000 or so. So it's really a kind of a back and forth. You can tell that I'm giving you incredibly broad ranges because
I don't mind broad, but I think a lot of people out there, just they don't know what reasonable is. They're just starting to get into development.
Sure.
They're a one-man studio. they've never hired this before. They don't know what the going rate for art is. There's definitely some people out
Right.
there is like, art, I can copy it. I must get it for free. There's people who pirate every movie and just don't think about, there's a lot of labor costs here. But most people who are actually serious about giving money are probably serious about, okay, well, if someone else's time is worth money, I need to have enough money in order to hire in the first place. But it is cheaper than people think. You don't need a $10,000 budget in order to actually get the couple assets that you need. If you have $1,000 budget, but you only need a couple assets to make your game work, yeah, you can easily fly that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on what you need in terms of assets. I mean, we're going with fairly, I mean, you can't make a game with well, I guess you can make a game with a gun and a character. I mean, look at Super Hot. But it depends on what you want, because, I mean, like UI is a prime example of the greatest underestimated level of work and complexity that exists in game design. I mean,
Oh yeah,
nobody thinks.
everyone needs to have a really, really good UI. You need to have it polished. It needs to be designed well. It can't just be, oh yeah, I have a number I throw up there in the corner. And you're right. People don't think about it because it's so passive in their playing experience. It kind of washes over them. Probably a good example would be for the film industry is like the lighting. No one thinks about
Mm.
how much effort goes into the lighting in film. And in games, not only do you also have to think about the lighting, but you have to think about these things like how is the user actually going to interact with this cool stuff you're making in the game.
Sure, like I mean, just as in film with lighting, it's the one thing that pervades every other thing. So you can have the greatest costumes, you can have the greatest actors, but if the lighting is off, and it just like UI, if it's off, you're going to know it right away. If it's on, you're not going to have a clue that it's even something that took time in the first place.
Hmm.
And UI is just, and it's the art form of UI is something so unique and just so unlike any other discipline of art. I mean, it's not even like graphic design for websites and stuff because we have great graphic designers who do corporate logos and whatnot. They do web design. We even do non-gaming apps, and they are fantastic. And then you stick them in an RPG, and everything just falls apart. It's like they go back to MS Paint and you're scratching your head going, why can't you just apply your skills from there? Because they're creating these gorgeous, serious apps and then creating just the simplest of RPG assets. I know, don't get me wrong, they look good, but they're a noticeably different quality than somebody that is very, very kind of trained and honed in that one area. So that finding good people in that department is incredibly hard. I've dedicated years of my life to building our UI team, but then after it's been designed, you have to make the whole thing work. And that's like making an entire game upon itself, of just making the UI do what it's supposed to do, whether it's in scale form, like we used a lot in UDK and Unreal 3, whether it's in NGUI in Unity, or something like Coherent or God-forbid Slate in Unreal Engine 4, which nobody really knows how to use yet. So it's us just crossing our fingers, hoping that nobody wants anything too complex with Unreal 4 at this point. But that part of it just takes so much time, and people they just don't know, right? So you tell them that, well, it's 60 hours of work to do a decent UI, or 80 hours of work, and that's usually where the jaw hits the floor and the negotiation comes to an unfortunate end.
What other stuff do you find that what would you wish clients knew before they came to you?
Right. Just, well, it depends on what they're coming to us for. So for just general artwork, just the amount of time it takes to do a 3D model and to get it done right. And I mean, that's just a general understanding of what goes into doing a nice 3D character. But, overall, across all of the departments, I would say the one thing I would really, really love if they knew is just how much time is spent on revisions and what it takes to take some comments and some critiques about, her bottom lip is too fat, or her ears need to be lowered by 2 centimeters, and what it takes in terms of fielding the critiques, setting it up in terms of a task, assigning it out, getting it done, getting the preview image to go back up again, and this and that. And for a lot of things, we'll just charge a flat rate. And we're starting to change the way we work a little bit, so that we say, we'll charge a flat rate. You're gonna be entitled to this many revisions, but after that, we're going to have a conversation, because either A, we're not understanding what you want well enough, or B, maybe you don't know what you want well enough until you see it. And that's a lot of how it works with clients, is they have this idea in their head and it's kind of vague, and then we put something on paper and then they go, well, well, I think I want it a little bit different. And it's this back and forth guessing game with them as well as it is with us to find out what they want. And one thing I really wish would just people would realize the amount of internal work that is required to process those new requests and to make those changes. It's not just like them making the change and going, oh, that's great. It's the whole back and forth communication flow that really takes a lot of time to make sure we get it right. So what we try to do when we start any new project or any new job is we have a lot of paperwork up front that is designed to get as much of this information out of the client as we possibly can so that when we finally hit the switch and go, there's a minimal amount of that back and forth. But we still get clients that will just change their mind mid-stride and say, yeah, I don't want a scroll bar here anymore. I think it should be a drop-down list. And then it's like, let's throw out the last week of work and then just tack on another one. And the problem with charging a fixed rate for this is that we just end up eating that cost.
Yeah, I mean, I assume in their contracts you have it pretty clearly laid out of, hey, if we're doing this many revisions, you're going to have to pay this much extra fee.
Well, I mean, to be honest, they aren't. The revisions aren't mentioned at all in any of our contracts. For the most part, we've just been operating, and it's to build up a good reputation, and it's to build up a great portfolio, and just to build up really good relations with our clients. We've just been operating under kind of the MO of we're going to do this until you're completely satisfied. And that's probably why we have so many satisfied clients and maybe not the best bottom line is because we really throw in everything we have to make sure that when you walk away, not only do you have exactly what you want, but it looks better than you thought it should.
Yeah, that is really generous of you guys.
Well, some would call it foolhardy because it's not like I mean, like I said, I always want to make sure that our people are comfortable and they're never having really to sit down and worry about money. But as a company as a whole, it's not like we're rolling in the cash. But that being said, it's all part of working your way up that ladder and getting a portfolio and getting a client base of people that you've grown up with now over years who are now on Steam, who now have successful Kickstarters, and we can expand our budgets from there. So I guess it's a short-term payoff for a long-term reward.
That totally makes a lot of sense. Definitely, it's a good strategy as a company to, you take a little bit of a loss, you do a little bit of extra work, and then they're recommending to all their friends, they're hiring you back once they actually make their big success and their big money. So that sounds like a good business model to me.
Well, and as I was kind of going over, the amount of projects and the size of the projects we have on the go, we're going to have, they always say that 10% of your clients will occupy 90% of your time. So we've got the other 90% of our clients that are great and they're just thrilled with everything. We just have clients that will just throw a concept at them and they'll just say, I remember we had a client last year. So we were doing some environmental illustrations for these alien worlds. And normally for this, we're looking at somewhere between 15, 20 hours of work. And we threw up our mood boards of just like, this is the general color we want. We're talking 45 minutes of work, an hour and a half. And we threw up the general mood boards, general shapes of mountains, but that was it. And he says, great, this is awesome. Everything I wanted. Tell me where to send the money. And this was 45 minutes into a 20-hour job. And so then, I had to begrudgingly tell him, no, we've got a lot more work to make this look as good as it can look. But we have clients like that on the vast majority where we'll just send them something that we would consider unfinished. And it's at that point where they're just thrilled with it. So, it's so easy to focus on people that kind of occupy a lot of your time. And I feel they push us to be better at the end of the day with all of those revisions. There's no doubt about that. And I'm grateful and I have to remind myself of that. But the vast majority of our clients, I couldn't ask for better people to work with. And that's why we've purposely stuck to the AA game. And I haven't gone out to try to find a lot of AAA clients. I mean, we've worked with Disney, we've worked with some big people, but I don't put a lot of effort into going out and getting those clients because the level of passion and patience and understanding and kind of camaraderie that exists within the AA scene is just such a thrill and a pleasure to work with that the vast majority of our clients will easily make up any hardship or frustration that might come from someone that really is just pushing us to be better artists and to be better developers.
Makes sense. All right, theoretical situation. Let's say I have a time machine. You can go back 4 or 5 years just when you're starting out, just when you're first starting to get those clients in 2010, 2011, but you got 30 seconds to tell yourself something. What do you say?
Oh, do I get 30 seconds to think about what I'm going to tell myself in 30 seconds?
No, you do not. You are going right now.
Damn it. get out of that relationship with that girl for 5 years and focus on your career.
No, no,
You
no.
know,
Seriously though, like career wise, like, what is
uh,
there some type of mistake you think you made, direction you wish you didn't
uh,
go down?
yeah, of course, and it's really really easy to sit there and go, well, all of my mistakes have led me to where I am, and but I think about a few things that if I hadn't done that, I would have been where I am now 3 years ago for sure. So 30 seconds, the first thing would be pick one thing and just focus on that one thing. Don't get distracted by all of the other quote unquote opportunities that are going to come your way. For us, it was focusing on client services and starting off small. And that's the other one. Just start off small and just whatever you think you can do, cut it into a quarter and do. You think something is going to take, times it by 5, and that's how long it's going to take. And then the third one would just be look really, really hard at your tool set and just find people that know a lot more than you do and become their best friend and ask them every question you can think of. And don't spend 2 years going through project management tools just to end up finally with the one that lets you run your business properly, because there was a lot of experimentation with inefficiency to get to where we are today. So if that was 30 seconds, that's what I would crank out. Of course, I wouldn't have listened to myself back then because I knew everything, but that's how I could waste my breath for 30 seconds.
Yeah, I've asked that question to a lot of people, and they're always like, baby, you're right. You were just like, no, 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 you do this better, you do that. I like that. It was a jam-packed 30 seconds. I didn't quite time it, but it was
Well,
close enough.
yeah, well, I think as part of my job, what I spend every day doing is looking at the challenges of the past and thinking about how we can make sure that those don't happen in the future. And it's not like, I look back a year ago and I say, oh, well, we shouldn't have done that, and then I just quietly sweep it under the rug and continue doing the same thing. I mean, I take this stuff very seriously, so it's in my head every day of the mistakes or the things that have taught me how to do things better, and making sure that we never go down those roads ever again. I mean, a lot of the other thing that we've learned a lot is just how to deal with clients, how to push back, and how to the single most important thing by far for what I do and what our company does is that we set the expectations of the clients to be in line with what's going to happen over the course of our relationship and what's going to be produced at the end of it. Every single challenge that we've ever faced as a company has always resulted from the expectations of one person being different from the expectations of another person, be it an artist, be it a client, be it a programmer, be it myself. And so what I don't think we've done enough of in the past, and what we're doing a lot of now, is how do we make sure those expectations across the board all line up as close as possible. And once you get there, you can do anything, and they're going to be thrilled because it's exactly what they expected. So, so yeah, so that's what I do, and that's what I have to do to keep this company growing and expanding, is learning from our mistakes. And I think that's what we all have to do in life if we want to go meta with this.
Absolutely. That definitely makes a whole lot of sense. It's what everyone does. You have to experiment. You have to fail. You have to get out there. Too many people are
Yes.
afraid to even try just because of all of the possibilities of failure. And everyone who succeeded out there, the common story is that they just got out there and tried it, even though they could have failed.
Or, the more common story is they tried it and they failed, and they tried it again and they failed and they tried it again. And like you
Yeah,
look at there's
absolutely.
that infograph that went up on LinkedIn a couple weeks ago about it was just like the path of Angry Birds, and it was just like failure for like 50 times, the point where everybody's just like, to hell with this, we're giving up. And then one idea comes across their desk and they're like, all right, do this. And then boom, you've got Angry Birds. And the thing is that nobody covers those 50 failures. Nobody knows about those things. They only cover that
Hmm.
one instant. And so those are the expectations that people have, is like, oh, they came up with the Angry Birds and made $1 billion. Let's do that. And when it doesn't happen, then they throw in the towel and they walk away. But you have to realize, like, you have to fail in some way or another for years before you get to a level of comfort where you can just afford to feed yourself with what you're passionate about, unless you're just lucky as hell. And then it's years after that before you start getting a bit more comfortable. And
Yeah, it's
uh,
that instant success myth.
yeah, it doesn't happen. I mean, it happens. I mean, I had that happen
It
to in
it
in my
it
past.
happens, yes, but it isn't what you should be aiming for, and it isn't what you should be expecting. You should expect that when you start, you're going to
No, no.
possibly not succeed.
Yeah. Well, very, very possibly in that. at the end of a couple of years, what your ideas and your goals are going to be radically different than what they started. And if they're not, that means that chances are you've been a little bit too rigid in the path that you've been taking, and you've been missing a lot of interesting opportunities to pivot or to modify. I mean, I know I said that stay focused on one thing, and you should always stay focused on one thing until it runs its course. But you got to be open to the fact that there might be a better way to do it, or there might be something else that needs to
Absolutely.
be looked at. So
Makes a lot of sense. All right, I like to wrap up every show not just talking about, game making and that whole process, but also talking about game playing because as you know, if you're, trying to figure out a good UI, you need to study the other games that are out there, figure out how they solve their problems. Hey, if the game's good, why is it good? If this game's bad, why is it bad? So I highly encourage game developers to, continue to play a lot of games. It's too common that I'll hear, oh, I'm too busy for games now. And that's a mistake. You won't learn as much. For me personally, I was just replaying Last of Us. I had a party. It was my birthday, and we sat down and got through like 70% of The Last of Us in one sitting. We were all kind of hot swapping the controller. So it was kind of interesting to
Whew.
play that game in a different experience than intended with a bunch of people
Right.
who had already played it, sitting down for their second time, kind of commenting on the way they design the aspects, because we're all a bunch of game designers too. So, of course, we were talking about the level design and the UI and the way they're teaching different mechanics and the way they're foreshadowing. So it was a pretty fun and interesting experience.
Yeah, that I'm not gonna lie, that makes me incredibly jealous and envious just to hear that experience that somebody else is having. But with the exception of mobile games, I would say that for the most part, I'm probably in the same boat as the group of people that you described about having not enough time for games, especially hardcore games. I mean, we do a lot of mobile development, so I was just playing Republic and a bunch of other games on the mobile, and I'm always going through mobile games just looking for the UI because I know I can get in there and I can see 80% of the game in terms of like the UI and the general mechanics within 2 or 3 minutes. I take screenshots of every screen. We've got a database of something like 300 games detailing out all the UIs that we pull for inspiration. But in terms of actually sitting down and devoting some serious time into the gameplay experience of a console or a PC game, a 90, 110 hour week doesn't really leave a lot of hours left to do that. And even then, I'm thinking, I could
Yeah,
be doing
it's
invoices right
really,
now.
really hard to like justify putting time into a game over, 15 hours. And, there's all these really great experiences out there, but too many of them,
There's
like, they're just bad in their first 10. Like, oh man, it gets really great at hour 20. And it's like, I don't
like
have that much time to put into it anymore.
like Star Trek: The Next Generation. But then I think like what happens if I wouldn't have gotten through season 1 and 2 of Star Trek: The Next Generation? I would have never have had that influence in my life. So clearly I will not make any defense in what I'm saying in that fact that I know I'm missing out on an incredible depth of experiences that will make me a better game designer. But, in my position, one of the things that I surrendered to probably about 5 or 6 years ago is that unless I'm devoting 100% of my time towards studying game design and doing exactly what you just described, playing games, especially with friends, and ripping them apart, putting them back together again, I'm never going to be the best game designer that I can be. And if I can't be the best game designer that I can be, why am I the one designing this game and not someone like, Daniel Cook or Jesper Jewell or somebody like that who has devoted their whole life full time to doing nothing but learning how to make the best games. And it was the same with level design, 2D art, 3D art, everything else. And in my position, which is kind of, it makes me sad in a way, one of the things that I've just surrendered to is that a game designer designs games, not me. He'll design it way better. I'll offer my feedback just so I could feel like I gave something to this. But at the end of the day, who am I to tell him how to design a game better than him when he does that every day? And the same with who am I to tell my UI guy, this button should look like this. I'll certainly give feedback from an outside perspective because I think that's very important when you're getting really close to a project is you lose that objectivity.
Yeah, feedback is
But at the end of the
critical.
day, yeah, yeah. And we get it from our clients too. But from my position, I have such a high level view of so many projects that I can just I can see things a little bit more objectively as opposed to really getting deeply, deeply involved. I mean, that being said, I'm not our art director, so I'm not the guy that has the final say on how things look. It's him and whatnot. So, in terms of playing games, it's one of those things where it's just after a 90-hour work week, I have to look at my wife and my cats, and I have to look at the outside with sunshine and grass and say, I'm going to go and spend the 20 minutes left of my week out there or in her arms or whatever else and play The Last of Us and tell me all about it. Or I'll watch a Let's Play video as I'm doing some invoicing and whatnot.
Makes total
So,
sense. So,
relating to that last point, that's something that our art director does, and I will certainly recommend that. As a producer, you're going to be spending a lot of time doing some fairly mundane, repetitive tasks, and if you can just get a Let's Play video going on the other monitor, that's a phenomenal way to get a very high and not quite as detailed of an experience, but you'll get the gist of some of the major points out of that. So if you can have that going, if you could have podcasts like this one, for example, or any of the other ones out there playing while you're working out or running, there's a lot of other ways to ingest that information. And it's not to the same extent, but it's better than nothing, I think.
oh yeah, I'm addicted to having some voice going on in the background while I'm working. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I made the show is because I'm always wanting to listen to other people's stories, hear their process, hear where they're thinking, why they made the choices that they made. I can only venture to guess as we're playing games, but with actually sitting down and talking with someone, you can really hear, oh, I was thinking this, I wanted to do that because of that. And speaking
Sure.
of which, if you wanted to,
It's the
I
I was going to say that's the exact same reason I started that other podcast I had, which has been now kind of defunct for 3 years. But it was just how do I'm going to be reading these white papers anyways. I may as well record them. But B, I mean, I think as you're getting new into any industry, for the most part, it's looking at how can I give back and what can I do to kind of make these valid connections with people by giving. And for me, it was industry broadcast. That's how I started. And I just took the driest academic white papers on game design I could find, and I just read them aloud into a podcast. And it sounds very familiar, similar to what, although it sounds like you're a little bit more up to date, a little bit more schnaz than I ever was.
So speaking of which, if you want to hear about other shows and other conversations, you can go back into the B&E Now archives and listen to all of the past episodes, listen to or read the show notes, and find out more about other companies and their process and what they did. You can find that at beindynow.com. You can also go to tobiahmarks.com. That's my webpage where I have blog posts and articles that talk about experiences I have. Other developers ask me questions, articles on different topics such as monetization and best practices. Or you can follow me on Twitter at tobiahmarks. Where can we find out more about Ironbelly Studios or possibly hire you guys out if, I'm an indie studio and looking for some contract work?
Sure. So obviously www.ironbellystudios.com. It's spelt the way you'd expect it to be spelt. You can go on Twitter. We have Twitter synced in, but it's not something that we're too active on. But twitter.com/ironbellystudio, because the user limit is limited to that many characters. Facebook.com/ironbellystudios. And you can just send me an email if you like, info@ironbellystudios.com, and let me know what you have in mind and what you're looking for. And I would love to talk to you about your ideas and help you realize your vision.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ryan, for being on the show.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It was just a pleasure to sit down with you today.
And for everyone else out there, go out and make some games.